Okay, welcome to unit number 4, Linkage Institutions. In this unit, we'll be looking at 3 chapters, chapters 12, 13, and then 11, through the next 2 weeks. So make sure you're on task with your readings, and you're also checking out the Hippocampus videos as well. So what are linkage institutions? Well, these are organizations that really link or connect the individual citizen, the voter, to the government. I could have one impact, but again, connecting or linking through political parties, your impact grows. Through special interest groups, your impact grows, your voice is louder. And then the media really unveils what's kind of happening in our state capital, what's happening locally with certain issues, and what's of course happening nationally. Today though, we start looking at one specific linkage institution, and that is the special interest group. In the Gettysburg Address, Abraham Lincoln famously talked about our great government, or our great country, as a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Our Constitution begins with "we the people." The question is, though, does that mean collective? Is that individual? Is it good to form groups or factions, for example? Should we be doing things for the greater good? These are the questions that we will be tackling in the next few days. Political scientists say that there are 4 major democratic theories: traditional, pluralist, elite, and hyper-pluralism. Today we're going to be focusing on the pluralist theory. Now clearly the traditional theory is that everyone has the right to participate in government, either by a direct or representative vote, and the majority vote rules. I mean, we see that with our freedom to speak. You could see here's a rally, a Tea Party rally. That's how we basically think of government, right? As individuals. However, there's this also pluralist theory, that people with common interests will form an organized group to promote their ideas and causes which influence the political agenda. Now, is that a good thing? That a small group of people can get together and perhaps with money, with connections, influence policy making? James Madison argued that it's not a bad thing. In his famous Federalist Paper number 10, now remember, the Federalist Papers were those essays that were created to push for the ratification of the Constitution. And you'll see, according to this, in this essay, James Madison argues that the Constitution would create a national government large and diverse enough to balance the will of the popular majority with minority rights. He said this country is great because obviously if we have one faction or one group, one interest group, another one can form to balance it out. Here's what he said specifically. The smaller the society, the fewer probably will be the distinct parties and interests composing it. Now the fewer the interests, the more frequently will a majority be found of the same party, and the smaller the number of individuals composing a majority, the more easily will they concert and execute their plans of oppression. But if you extend that sphere, if you have a larger country and you take in a greater variety of parties and interests, you can make it less probable that a majority of the whole will have a common motive to invade the rights of our citizens. So he basically argued that a strong, large republic would be a better guard against the, tyranny of the majority. He thought that smaller republics like states become the more, were worse because factions can take control. But here, in our larger national government, other factions can be formed, and we have the freedom to assemble, and then they could actually block each other, which will then cause pragmatic policy making, forcing compromises. So that idea Madison already looked at, that factions would balance each other out. So again, you'd see the picture on the left and the picture on the right, 2 different groups. Perhaps it's trial lawyers on one side, and the other side, tort reformers. They'll form different special interest groups. They'll form separate PACs to promote their causes to Congress and donate money. That's what we mean by balancing each other out. Now, the Medicare prescription drug fight, I'm sorry you can't see the quick time. It was a video. We'll be watching that video in class, so we'll talk about how interest groups are formed. But let's move on to what they are. So again, what are interest groups? An interest group is an organization of people, and they share common objectives, they share a common belief, and they actively attempt to influence government policymakers through, direct and indirect methods. Interest groups may form in response to change, a political or economic change, a dramatic shift in population or technology that affects how people live or work, or a change in social values or cultural norms. Some groups form to support the change or even speed it along, while others form to fight change. Think of the Tea Party that kind of grew out of anger over some of the policies by George W. Bush at the end, the TARP policy, and President Barack Obama with his healthcare policy. That's what we're talking about. And now here are some interest groups. You can see National Rifle Association, the American Association of Retired People, which is the AARP. These are by members, I believe. They're ordered. National Federation of Independent Businesses. So when you look at these, what do you see in common here? Well, interest groups help bridge the gap between citizens and government, right? They help raise public awareness and inspire action on various issues. They often provide public officials with specialized and detailed information which may be useful in making policy changes. And they serve as another check on public officials to make sure that they're carrying out their duties responsibly. And again, this is all part of that pluralist theory I mentioned before, that the pluralist theory focuses on the participation of groups in a decentralized government structure that offers many points of access to policymakers. And according to the pluralist theory, politics is a contest among various interest groups that compete at all levels of government to gain benefits for their members. So although those groups I mentioned before have some have similar characteristics, usually they're around economic issues. They have many members and leaders on a state, on a national, local charter, local leadership as well. They usually collect dues. And therefore, they have inherently an upper class bias because they're mostly about business. You're not going to have an interest group about the homeless, by homeless people. And then, of course, sometimes there's an action-reaction to interest groups. So you might see the National Organization of Women promoting abortion, and then suddenly the Christian Coalition will be formed that will try to stop that, and then a next organization is formed. So sometimes you see them competing. Perhaps the Tea Party organization has now kind of promoted the Occupy Wall Street kind of interest group in a way. That's what we mean by action-reaction. Again, most interest groups have a business interest group. So businesses have long been well organized for effective action. You have hundreds of business groups that are now operating in Washington, D.C., in the 50 state capitals, and of course at local levels. Two umbrella organizations that include small and large corporations and businesses are the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, also the National Association of Manufacturers, or NAM. In addition to representing about 3 million individual businesses, the Chamber has more than 3,000 local, state, and regional affiliates. It has become a major voice for millions of small businesses, and we'll talk more about them in the next slide. But there's also hundreds of trade organizations. They're far less visible than the Chamber of Commerce, but they are also important in seeking policies that assist their members. Trade organizations usually support policies that benefit specific industries. So, for example, people in the oil industry work for policies that favor the development of oil as an energy resource. Other business groups work for policies that favor the development of coal or solar power and nuclear power. Traditionally, these business interest groups have been viewed as staunch supporters of the Republican Party. And that's because Republicans are more likely to promote this, hands-off government policy, less regulations. However, though, there's a lot of money in interest groups. So the Democratic National Committee has been more likely to listen to these interest groups to, again, receive donations. And donations from the corporations to the Democratic National Committee has more than doubled in the past 10 years. So we've seen a big difference there. And then, of course, there's also, again, with the Democrats, interest groups representing labor. That's been very influential, probably one of the most influential groups in our country's history. I mean, they date back to the 1880s when the American Federation of Labor, the AFL, was formed. So the AFL is a confederation of 56 national and international labor unions that represent about 11 million members. The Change to Win Federation consists of 7 unions and 6 million workers. And they were very important in the election of Barack Obama. Although union membership has fallen steadily from 40 million employees in 1950s to, again, about a little bit over 10 million in 2008. But still, that's an interest group that really favors the Democrats. We also have agricultural interest groups. The Farm Bureau, they represent 5 million families. They lobby government. Consumer interest groups like Consumer Reports, created by Ralph Nader. And then we have, of course, the senior citizen interest groups like the AARP. And again, here you see how the impact of an interest group. Now, we said that the unions were very supportive of the Democratic Party. The Chamber of Commerce, again, millions of businesses spent over $20 million in 2010 to defeat Barack Obama's and the Democratic Congress. And in fact, they were very successful. The Congress, at least the House, switched hands from Democrats, Nancy Pelosi, to Republican control. And again, you can see this is a website, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Fighting for Your Business. And it kind of talks about some of the things that they were doing to support their views. And there's a good example of an interest group. Now, how does a group like the Chamber of Commerce get $20 million? Or how does a union get millions of dollars to support the Democrats? Well, they collect dues. You could see if you want to become a member of the AARP, you can become a member. It's only $16 per year, and usually you get some nice benefits and discounts. Of course, all of these organizations have leaders on the local, state, and national level, and of course, they want to get as many members as possible because members equals clout in Washington. Sorry that the visual didn't come out here, but basically, just to show you what an interest group usually looks like, they usually are broken up into chapters. What would be in the top is the National American Civil Liberties Union, and then each state has one, like the ACLU of New Jersey and the New York CLU. The ACLU is one of those interesting interest groups. It's not about economics, but like Christian Coalition, or now it's more what they call a public interest group. It's more about an interest formed for the purpose of working for what they say is the public good. So Common Cause, the ACLU, they're out there fighting for a cultural or social issue. Again, we've kind of spoken about this already, that interest groups do have an upper class bias, and if that's a problem or not is something that we can always discuss in class and have a debate. Are businesses too friendly with Washington politicians who need their donations? Does the common person have a say? I think we saw in the last election where, with the power of the internet and social technology, Democrats were able to match corporate donations, and perhaps the super PAC decision by the Supreme Court may unravel that. But at this point, it looks like this upper class bias may not be such a problem. Again, this slide just kind of shows you what we talked about with this action-reaction response. So in the Gilded Age in the 1890s, government grew, and some cartels, what they called big trusts or corporations, were being broken up by the Sherman Antitrust Act. Well, then business interest groups grew to kind of curtail that. In the 1930s, when government